The courtroom was silent. Everyone was waiting for the judge to speak. And when he did, it felt like the world had stopped. I am ruling that the child will be placed in the custody of his stepmother, Mrs. Thompson, and not with his biological mother, Miss Williams. I couldn't breathe. It was hard enough being a single mom, fighting to make ends meet. But this felt like the final blow. I'd never been rich, but I loved my son with everything in me. And that love was enough, I thought. But apparently, it wasn't. The judge, an older man, looked down at his papers, like he had no idea how much his decision would change our lives. He didn't know the sleepless nights I'd spent working 2 jobs, the times I'd gone without just to make sure my son had what he needed. He didn't know the bond we shared, how he called me mom and best friend in the same breath. But none of that mattered now. Across the room, my ex-husband's wife, Karen, smiled. I could see it, the way her lips curled. It was like she had won some game and I was the loser. She didn't even have to raise her voice or make a scene. She just sat there holding her head high, looking proud of the judge's ruling. My heart sank, and then, in the middle of all that, came a sound I will never forget. "Mom, please don't go," my son said. He was only 7, but his voice carried with such strength that it stopped everyone in their tracks. I turned around, trying to hold it together. My son was standing at the edge of the courtroom, his small hand reaching out to me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He didn't understand why I was being taken from him. He didn't understand why the judge, the man who was supposed to protect us, had made this decision. The room shifted. People looked at each other, unsure of how to react. His words had cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "Mom," he said again, louder now, "I love you." That was it. The moment everyone was waiting for. Karen, sitting on the other side, froze. Her smile faltered just for a second. She wasn't used to him saying something like that in public. Not with the eyes of the whole courtroom on him. The judge, too, seemed taken aback. His stern face softened for just a moment, like he was reconsidering everything. But nothing changed. The ruling was still made. My son was still being taken from me. And in that moment I felt so small, so helpless. But what happened next, nobody expected. My son turned to Karen, his voice trembling but clear, and said, "I don't want to stay with you. I want to stay with my mom. You're not my mom." The room went silent again. The shock on everyone's face was hard to ignore. Even Karen's face went pale. She didn't know how to react to that. She never expected him to say that. The judge looked from my son to Karen, and I could see him struggling with what to do. He knew the decision he'd made wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. "Son," the judge said, "we need to think about what's best for you." My son wiped his eyes, not understanding what was going on. All he knew was that his mother was being taken away from him, and that was not okay. "I don't want her to go. I want to be with my mom," he said again, this time his voice breaking. "Mom loves me. She always loves me. She makes me feel safe." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. My heart felt like it was being ripped apart. Karen's composure faltered. She looked at the judge, then back at my son. "He's just confused. He's young, he'll get over it, but the damage was done." Those words hit everyone in the room hard. This wasn't just about a judge's decision or who could offer more money or a bigger house. This was about the love a mother has for her child. And it was clear now that my son knew who really loved him. The judge paused. It felt like an eternity. And then, in the most unexpected twist, he looked down at his papers and said, "I need more time to think about this." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The judge had just put the ruling on hold. We were all still in shock. My son walked over to me, and without saying a word, he threw his arms around me. He didn't need to say anything else. His embrace said it all, and in that moment I knew, no matter what happened next, we would be okay. It wasn't just about the decision the judge would make. It was about the love that no court could take away. And even though the fight wasn't over, I felt a glimmer of hope. My son had reminded everyone in that room that love is stronger than any ruling. Love doesn't have a price tag. It doesn't depend on how much money you make or what title you hold. It depends on the sacrifices you're willing to make for the ones you care about. That was something no judge, no stepmother, and no ruling could ever take from us. The days that followed were a blur. The court hearing had ended in a temporary suspension of the ruling. But no one knew what would happen next. The judge had ordered a deeper evaluation, more time to consider the best interests of my son. But I could tell there was a shift. Something had been exposed that couldn't be easily ignored. When we left the courthouse that day, my son didn't speak much. His small hand was clasped tightly in mine, and his steps were slow, like he was walking on fragile ground. I wanted to tell him everything would be okay, but I wasn't sure myself. The truth was, my heart felt heavy, as if the weight of everything had settled in. That night, I tucked him into bed. Just like I always did, he gave me a tired smile, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, almost like he was testing the water. "Will you still be my mom if I stay with—" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even considered that possibility, the thought of him living with someone else. Of being told I wasn't enough to keep him, I took a deep breath before responding. "Trying to keep my voice steady, baby," I said gently, brushing his hair out of his face. "You don't ever have to worry about that. I'll always be your mom, no matter what happens." He looked at me, still unsure, but then his small hand reached up to touch my cheek. "I know," he whispered. "I just don't want to forget." I wanted to promise him that nothing would change. But the truth was, I couldn't make that promise. The courts had the power to take him away from me, no matter how much we loved each other. But I could promise him something else. "Listen to me," I said, squeezing his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll fight for you." "I'll always fight for you." He nodded and closed his eyes, finally falling asleep in my arms. I stayed there for a while, holding him close, as if the weight of the world would somehow be lighter if I could just keep him safe for a little while longer. The next few weeks were a roller coaster. The media caught wind of the story, and suddenly, I was thrust into a spotlight I hadn't asked for. There were interviews, reporters outside my door, and phone calls from lawyers and advocates, all trying to help. Some supported me, some supported Karen, and a few just seemed to want the drama. I didn't care about any of that. I didn't care about the attention or the noise. I cared about one thing, my son. Every time I looked at him, I saw the fear still lingering in his eyes. And every time I saw Karen, I could feel her coldness, the way she'd look at me as though she had already won. She made it clear that she thought I wasn't good enough to raise him. She said I couldn't provide the stability he needed. But what she didn't know was that love was the greatest stability of all. Then came the day of the second hearing. The courtroom was packed just like before, but this time, there was something different in the air. The judge was more serious, more focused, as if he had finally begun to understand the gravity of the situation. Karen sat on one side of the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while I sat on the other, my heart pounding in my chest. The judge called us to the stand one by one. My ex-husband, whose face had been unreadable throughout the whole process, gave his testimony. He painted me as irresponsible, incapable of providing for my son. He spoke about how my financial struggles made me unfit to be a mother, about how Karen could offer a more stable life. I fought back the tears. It wasn't true. It wasn't the full story, but I knew what was happening. The system was judging me based on my circumstances, not my love for my child when it was my turn. I took a deep breath and stood up. My voice shook at first, but I steadied myself. I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every single mom who had ever been told she wasn't enough, for every single mother who had fought against the world to hold her family together. "I may not have the wealth or the fancy things Karen can offer him," I said, my voice growing stronger, "but what I have is something she can never give him. I have love, I have sacrifice, I have all the moments that matter, all the nights I've spent working and worrying just so he could have a better future." I paused, looking at my son, who was sitting quietly in the front row, his small face full of uncertainty, and I will never stop fighting for him. No judge, no court, no one can take that away from me. There was a long silence in the courtroom. For the first time, I saw the judge look at me differently. His eyes softened, and I knew that somewhere deep inside, he was reconsidering his decision. Karen, however, didn't seem to budge. She still had that cold, calculating look in her eyes. She didn't understand what was at stake here. This wasn't about who could offer the better luxury life. This was about who could love him the most. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke again. "I will take all testimonies into account," he said, his voice more somber. "Powerful real-life stories that spark change and inspire strength. Together we can explore stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that make a difference. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard. So let's grow this community of changemakers. Click subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. But I'm going to grant a temporary extension to Miss Williams. We'll need to revisit this case in 2 months. The situation will be reevaluated, and the child's preference will be considered more thoroughly. I exhaled, not fully understanding what this meant. But knowing it wasn't over yet, the fight wasn't won, but it wasn't lost either. That night, as I held my son in my arms once again, I whispered to him, "I told you I'd fight. I told you I'd never give up." He smiled, his small hand resting on my chest. "I know, Mom, I know," and somehow that night, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as against us as it seemed. The days following the court hearing were filled with a mix of emotions. The temporary extension was a small victory, but it didn't feel like enough. We had 2 months to prepare, 2 months for the judge to make his final decision, and every moment felt like a countdown. The world outside seemed to move on as usual. But for me, and especially for my son, time had slowed down. I could see the worry still etched on his face. Though he tried to hide it, he was a smart kid. He understood what was at stake. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table when he came into the room. Holding a drawing in his hand, his face was serious. "More so than I'd ever seen, Mom," he said, his voice soft but determined. "I want you to have this." He handed me the drawing, and I unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of the two of us. There we were, hand in hand, surrounded by a big heart. Above us in his childish scrawl were the words, "My mom, always." I couldn't hold back the tears. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a declaration. A reminder that no matter what happened in that courtroom, this was real, no judge could take that away. "Thank you, baby," I said, hugging him tightly. "This means everything." The days turned into weeks, and I continued to prepare for the final hearing. I spoke to my lawyer, gathering more support, trying to prove that I was capable, that love and dedication were more important than money. But no matter how much I tried to prepare, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were fighting against something bigger than the law. We were fighting against a system that didn't always see us, that didn't always understand our struggles. I spent a lot of time thinking about my son, about the life I had built for him. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And I knew deep down that I was doing the best I could. But how could I explain that to a judge who saw things in terms of numbers and statistics? How could I show him that my son didn't need a mansion or fancy things? He just needed me. When the day of the final hearing arrived, my son was with me as usual, sitting quietly by my side as I prepared myself for what lay ahead. The courtroom was packed again, the tension thicker than before. This time, Karen was sitting there too, her face rigid with confidence, her lawyer beside her, ready to make their case. I didn't have a lawyer like theirs, but I had something they didn't. I had truth on my side, I had love. The proceedings began, and I went through the motions, speaking about how I had provided for my son, how I had been there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every late-night conversation. I spoke about our bond, about how he had called me Mom every day of his life. I told them again that no one could love him the way I did. Karen's lawyer spoke next. He painted a picture of the perfect family life with Karen's stable home. Financial security. He made it sound like my love wasn't enough. Like a roof over his head and an expensive education could replace the things I had given him. He even suggested that my unstable financial situation was a danger to my son's future. I fought to stay calm, my hands trembling as I listened. I knew what they were doing, but it still hurt the idea that everything I'd worked for, everything I'd given up, wasn't enough because I didn't have a big house or a fat paycheck. It made me feel small, but I wasn't going to let them make me feel small, not this time. And then it was my son's turn. He was called to the stand, and for a moment, I feared he wouldn't speak. But when he stood, there was something different about him. Something older, stronger. He walked up to the microphone, and for the first time in the entire trial, he looked at the judge directly. "I want to stay with my mom," he said, his voice clear and firm. "She's the one who loves me. She's the one who's always there. I don't want to go live with them. I want to stay with her." The room went quiet. No one expected that. Everyone had assumed a child his age wouldn't understand the full weight of the situation. But he did. He understood exactly what was happening. And he chose me. The judge didn't say anything for a moment. His eyes moved from my son to me and then to Karen, who was visibly upset, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. But the words were already there, hanging in the air. "I don't need anything but my mom," my son added softly, looking up at me. My heart swelled with pride. How could anyone argue with that kind of truth? How could anyone deny a child's right to be with the person who loved him most? The judge finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Thank you, young man. Your testimony is very important." But the damage had already been done. My son had made his choice, and it was clear to everyone in the room who he wanted to be with. After a long pause, the judge looked back at all of us and said, "I will take all of this into consideration. The decision will be made shortly." We left the courtroom without knowing the final ruling. But I knew one thing for sure: I had fought with everything I had. And so had my son, no matter what happened next. I knew that our bond, our love, could never be broken. A few days later, the phone rang. "It was my lawyer. We won," he said, his voice full of relief. "The judge ruled in your favor. Your son will remain with you." I dropped the phone, unable to speak at first. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. My son was staying with me. We had won when I told him. His face lit up like the sun had just risen. He threw his arms around me and said, "I knew you wouldn't let them take me." "I'll never let them take you," I whispered, holding him close. "You're my everything." And just like that, we were free. We were together. And no matter what the world tried to tell us, we knew one thing for sure: love was stronger than anything else. The days after the ruling felt like a new beginning. Though they came with their own challenges, there was relief, yes, but also a sense of exhaustion that lingered in the air. The battle had been long, and while the outcome was a victory, the scars of the journey were still there. It wasn't just the legal fight that had drained me. It was the weight of constantly feeling like I had to prove I was good enough, prove I could give my son the life he deserved. But with the ruling in our favor, things started to settle. I was no longer waking up with a sense of dread about what the day would bring. The phone calls stopped, the reporters went away, and the fight for my son was over for now. At least, but the healing had only just begun. We spent a lot of time together in the weeks that followed. We went to the park more often, just like we used to. I watched my son laugh and play, his carefree joy a stark contrast to the tension we'd felt before. I could see the weight lifting off his shoulders. No more worrying about where he'd end up. No more wondering if the love we shared would be enough to keep us together. But I knew the fight hadn't really ended. It never truly ends, as a black woman. I understood that the world often saw me and my son as less than, as if we had to prove our worth every single day. This battle had been about more than just custody. It had been about showing the world that our love, our bond, was real and unshakable, no matter how many people tried to tear it down. I still remember the day my son turned to me, his eyes full of questions, his innocence still intact. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, "why did they try to take me away?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected it so soon. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer in a way that wouldn't make him feel like he was the cause of the fight. "You know, baby," I said softly, "sometimes people don't understand the way we live. They don't understand how much we love each other. But we know, don't we?" He nodded, but I could see the confusion still in his eyes. "I just don't understand why anyone would want to take me away from you," he said, almost as if he was trying to make sense of it all. I took a deep breath, pulling him closer to me. People make decisions that don't always make sense. They look at things like money and houses, but they don't see what we have. They don't see the love, the way we take care of each other, the way we hold each other up when times are hard. "I don't need money, Mom. I just need you," he said. His voice steady and sure. I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. In that moment, I knew that no matter how hard life got, no matter what anyone said or did, my son understood what mattered most. He understood that love, not wealth or status, was what made a family. In the months that followed, things slowly returned to normal, whatever normal meant after such a long battle. I kept working, and my son kept growing, his laughter and love filling our small home with warmth. We learned to cherish the little things: dinner together, late-night movies, the quiet moments where we didn't have to say anything to feel connected. But I never forgot what it had taken to get there. I never forgot the moment my son stood up in that courtroom, his small voice echoing through the silence, declaring his love for me. That was the moment I realized that no matter how much the world tried to tear us apart, we would always have each other, and nothing, no one, could ever take that away. As for Karen, the woman who had once believed she could take my place, I never heard from her again. I don't know what happened to her. But I knew this: she would never be able to replace the love between a mother and her child. She could offer him stability, a nice house, but she couldn't give him what I had, the unconditional love and sacrifice that had built our bond. And in the end, that was enough. It would always be enough. The months that followed our victory were filled with quiet moments of healing. My son and I found our rhythm again, a rhythm that wasn't governed by the stress of looming court dates or legal battles. We didn't have the luxury of forgetting the pain, but we learned to live with it, to move forward with a strength that came from knowing we had survived. In those months, I started to realize just how much we had been affected by the fight. My son's confidence grew day by day, but there were times when I saw a flicker of worry cross his face. I could tell he still carried the fear of losing me. Though it wasn't as heavy as it had been, I made it my mission to reassure him. To remind him that nothing would break us, we went back to the things that brought us joy. I took him to the library, and we spent afternoons reading together. We would laugh at the silly stories, and sometimes he would tell me his own wild tales about superheroes and adventure. Those moments felt like we were rebuilding, like we were healing from everything that had happened. One evening, as we sat on the couch, him curled up with his favorite book and me beside him, he suddenly closed the book and turned to me. His eyes were serious, but there was something in them that I hadn't seen before, something older. "More mature, Mom?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are we ever going to have to go to court again?" I looked at him, my heart tightening. I knew he was still carrying the weight of that day. He wasn't just a little boy anymore. He was a young man who had seen the hard realities of life and understood, perhaps more than I had realized, how fragile things could be. "No, baby," I said softly, taking his hand in mine. "We're not going back to court. We're safe now. You're safe." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. The scars from the battle, the uncertainty of the past were still there, but there was a peace in his eyes, something that told me he was learning to trust again, learning that we didn't have to be afraid anymore. The world around us moved forward too. There were still moments where I felt like I had to prove myself, to show that I was a good mother, a capable person. It was a quiet, persistent battle that never fully went away, especially as a black woman trying to make a life for herself and her child in a world that didn't always see her as enough. But I knew one thing for sure now: I had done it. I had fought, and I had won not just the legal battle, but the battle for my son's heart, his trust, and our future together. And then, one day, out of the blue, I received a letter. It was from the judge who had presided over our case. At first, I didn't know what to think. Why would he be reaching out to me now? I opened the envelope carefully, and as I read his words, a sense of closure washed over me. "Dear Miss Williams, I wanted to take a moment to personally acknowledge the courage and strength you demonstrated throughout the recent proceedings. While it is not my place to share personal opinions on cases outside of the courtroom, I feel compelled to commend you for your commitment to your son. Your actions during the trial, as well as the testimony of your son, were a clear reminder of the power of love and devotion in a family. In my years of service, I have seen many cases, but yours was different. Your story was a reminder that while the law plays a role in determining what's best for a child, it is the heart, the love of a mother, that truly defines a family. I want to wish you and your son all the best as you move forward. You both are stronger than I could ever have expected." Sincerely, Judge Reynolds sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. I had never expected anything like this to be acknowledged by the very person who had once made a decision that could have torn us apart. It was unexpected, and it felt like a final validation. I wasn't just a mother fighting for her son. I was a mother who had been seen, heard, and respected in a world that often overlooked me. I showed the letter to my son, and we talked about it for hours. It was a quiet moment, but in that silence, I could see how far we had come. He was more at ease now, more confident in himself and in our family. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I looked at him and smiled. "You know, baby, we made it through this. We're stronger than we were before." He smiled back at me, his eyes full of that unspoken love, the kind that no one could ever take from us. "I know, Mom, I knew we would, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe it. We had made it. And no matter what came next, I knew we would always be okay." As the weeks passed, life settled into a new routine, but something inside of me had shifted. The battles of the past had tested me in ways I never imagined, but they had also given me something precious, a deeper understanding of my own strength and a deeper connection with my son. We didn't talk about the court case as much anymore. We didn't need to. The victory, the sense of closure, was embedded in the way we lived each day. I found myself appreciating the little things more, the simple, ordinary moments that made up the fabric of our lives. There was a peace now, a calm that had replaced the constant fear and uncertainty. One afternoon, we took a walk to the neighborhood park, the sun shining down in that soft, golden way that only afternoon light can. The world felt right again, in the way that it does when you've overcome something difficult, when you've found your footing again after a storm. My son skipped ahead, his laugh ringing out like music, and I couldn't help but smile. "Hey, Mom," he called back to me, waving his arms in excitement. "Look at this." He was standing at the edge of the playground, his feet firmly planted in the sand. His eyes wide with wonder, he pointed to the sky, where a single bird was soaring high above us. "Gliding effortlessly through the air, I want to be like that bird," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of confidence. "Free, no worries." I walked up to him, crouching down to meet his eyes. "You already are, baby," I said softly, a lump forming in my throat. "You're free, you're strong, and you can do anything you want to." He smiled, nodding with understanding. It was like he truly got it now, in a way that only children can. They carry the hope of the world inside them, unburdened by the weight of everything that might try to hold them back. We spent the rest of the day at the park, playing, talking, and laughing, just us two, pieces of a whole that no one could ever take apart. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for my son, for this moment, for the strength we had both discovered in the fight we'd faced. That night, as I tucked him into bed and kissed his forehead, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with something soft and unspoken. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you ever think about what it would have been like if we didn't have each other?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. But the truth was simple and clear. "I don't think about that, baby," I said gently, brushing his hair from his face, "because we do have each other, and nothing, not anyone or anything, can take that away." He smiled and nodded, his eyes drifting closed, his hand finding mine once more. I love you too, more than anything." And as I left his room that night, I couldn't help but feel like this. Right here was all I ever needed. The battles, the pain, the heartbreak, it had all led to this. We had come through it, stronger and more connected than ever. And while I knew life would continue to throw challenges our way, I also knew one thing with certainty: we would face them together. No matter what the world threw at us, no matter how hard it got, we would always have each other. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. I pulled the door quietly behind me and stood there for a moment in the hallway, allowing the silence to settle over me, the echoes of my son's laughter. The memories of the days when I didn't know if we'd make it through those moments felt like distant memories now. We had made it, we had fought for what mattered, and we had won. I took a deep breath and smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, we were ready together. The weeks continued to drift by, each one a bit lighter than the last. It was as if the weight we had carried for so long had finally lifted, leaving space for something new to take root: peace, and the kind of quiet joy that comes from knowing you've survived the hardest storm. We didn't talk about the past much anymore, but it was always there, just beneath the surface, a part of the foundation of everything we had now. One Saturday morning, as I was making breakfast, my son came running into the kitchen, his energy as contagious as ever. "Mom," he shouted, excitement bubbling in his voice, "can we go to the library today?" "I need a new book." I smiled at him, wiping my hands on a towel. "Of course we can. What book are you looking for this time?" He grinned, holding up a piece of paper with his latest list of book titles. "I want to read about superheroes again, but this time, I want to learn about real heroes, like people who change the world. You know, like you." I paused, caught off guard by the simplicity of his words. "Like me?" I repeated softly, a smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah, like you," he said, his tone matter of fact. "You fought for me. You never gave up. That's what heroes do, right?" I felt my heart swell, the emotion catching in my throat. This child, this beautiful, strong child, had truly seen me, and understood the depths of the sacrifices I'd made for him. He didn't just see the struggle, he saw the love, the drive, the endless fight to keep our family intact. I knelt down to his level and put my hands on his shoulders. "You're my hero too," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "You give me the strength to keep going every single day. You're the reason I fight." He smiled brightly, and just like that, the world felt right again. We spent the rest of the day at the library just as we had so many times before. I watched my son dive into a new book with the same enthusiasm as always. But now there was something more to it. He wasn't just reading stories of fictional heroes. He was looking for something that reminded him of the real world, of the way we had fought to keep our family together, the way love above all else had made us strong. As the weeks turned into months, our lives began to feel fuller, richer in ways that didn't involve money or material things. We spent our weeks exploring new parks, cooking meals together, and taking walks through the neighborhood, talking about anything and everything. It was in these simple moments that we built our new life, one without the shadows of the past looming over us. But there was one moment, one that I will always remember, that encapsulated everything we had become. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the world outside is muffled, and the warmth of home wraps around you like a blanket. My son and I were sitting on the couch, the two of us lost in a puzzle. I looked at him, his concentration intense as he worked to fit the pieces together, and for a brief second, I saw something in his eyes, something that made my heart skip. "Mom," he said quietly, not looking up from the puzzle, "do you think I'll ever be like the heroes in the books? You know, the ones who make a big difference?" I paused, taking in the question, my hands stilled on the puzzle pieces. I knew this was one of those moments, one of those pivotal conversations that would shape the rest of his life. "You are a hero, baby," I said softly, my voice full of conviction. "You've been one since the day you were born. You don't have to do something big for the world to see you as a hero. Being kind, being strong when things are hard, standing up for what's right, that makes you a hero every day. You get to choose who you want to be, and as long as you choose love, you'll change the world in ways you can't even imagine yet." He looked up at me, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm going to be a good hero, just like you, right?" I nodded, my heart swelling with pride. "You already are." And that was the truth. He was my hero, just as I was his, and together we had built something unbreakable. We had faced every challenge, fought every battle, and come out stronger on the other side. As the rain continued to fall outside, I realized that this was the life we had always deserved, not the life of struggle or pain, but one where love and hope were our guiding lights. The kind of life that could never be torn apart because it was rooted in something deeper than circumstances. We were a family, unshakable and strong, and together we could face whatever the future held.